The very concept of the Erdtree, the central symbol of the lands between, is a relatively recent phenomenon, having supplanted an entirely different cosmic order that existed for eons prior. Before the golden boughs stretched skyward, before the two fingers whispered their divine mandates, before Queen Marika the Eternal ever drew breath, there was something else entirely, a primordial churning of life, where all things blended together in chaotic harmony, where the boundaries between species and forms had not yet hardened into the rigid categories we now take for granted. This is the secret that the Golden Order has spent centuries trying to bury, the inconvenient truth that undermines every sermon preached in Marika's name, because if the Erdtree is not eternal, if the greater will is not the first and only cosmic force to shape reality, then everything the demigods fought over, everything the tarnished are told to restore, is built on a foundation of lies. What makes Elden Ring's lore so utterly lunatic is not merely its complexity or its deliberate obscurity, though both are present in abundance, but rather the fact that the more you excavate its layers, the more you realize that the entire cosmology is a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped clean and written over again and again by successive powers, each one claiming to be the ultimate truth while desperately concealing the traces of what came before. The world you explore as a tarnished is not a fallen paradise awaiting restoration, but a crime scene, a place where gods murdered other gods, where cosmic entities waged wars of such totality that they rewrote the very laws of nature, where the victors literally reshaped reality to make their reign appear inevitable and eternal. Every golden leaf, every incantation, every fragment of lore you collect is propaganda, and the game invites you to become complicit in either perpetuating that propaganda or burning it all down, depending on which ending you choose. The sheer audacity of FromSoftware's narrative design is that they constructed a mythology dense enough to rival Tolkien, then deliberately shattered it into 1,000 contradictory pieces and scattered those pieces across item descriptions, environmental storytelling, NPC dialogues that shift depending on when you encounter them, and cryptic imagery that requires you to understand alchemical symbolism, Gnostic theology, and Norse mythology, just to begin unpacking. You are not meant to understand Elden Ring's lore on a first playthrough, or even a fifth, because the lore itself is about the impossibility of ever knowing the full truth, about how history is always written by the victors, about how the gods you serve may be usurpers who overthrew even greater powers. The lands between is a place where time has become unstable, where cause and effect loop back on themselves, where characters exist in multiple states simultaneously, and where the player character, the Tarnished, is both the potential savior and the ultimate pawn in a game whose rules were rigged long before you arrived. To call this story convoluted would be an understatement. To call it ambitious would be faint praise, but to call it lunatic begins to capture the vertigo of trying to hold the entire narrative in your head at once. The dizzying realization that every answer generates 3 new questions, that every certainty dissolves under scrutiny. This is a world where the main goddess dismembered her own consort and distributed his body parts as weapons, where her children inherited her madness and her ambition in equal measure, where the very concept of death was removed from the natural order and then weaponized as a tool of control, where the moon is not a celestial body, but a sentient entity with its own agenda, where the stars themselves were held in stasis to prevent fate from unfolding, where rot and decay are not mere afflictions, but the manifestations of an outer god seeking to corrupt the established order, where madness is not insanity but enlightenment. The terrible clarity that comes from perceiving the truth that the three fingers offer, that all division and suffering stems from the mistake of individuation itself, and that the only true peace is the annihilation of all distinction in the frenzied flame. The demigods you encounter, these tragic figures of immense power and profound brokenness, are not merely boss fights, but the shattered remnants of a family whose dysfunction reshaped continents, whose sibling rivalries ignited wars that killed millions, whose inability to cooperate or compromise left the world in a state of perpetual stagnation. Godric the Grafted, so desperate for strength that he mutilates himself and others in a grotesque parody of the Crucible's ancient fusion of forms. Radagon, the mightiest warrior, holding back the stars themselves even as the scarlet rot devours his mind, reduced to a feral beast haunting a desert while his loyal soldiers stage an endless festival of combat in his honor. Rykard, who sought to devour the gods and instead became a blasphemous serpent, his ambitions literally consuming him from within. Morgoth, the Omen King who defends the Erdtree despite being reviled by the very order he serves, a tragic embodiment of internalized oppression. Mog, who kidnapped his own half-brother to become consort to an outer god of blood, building a dynasty in the lightless depths beneath the world. Malenia, the blade of Miquella, undefeated in combat yet rotting from within, who in a moment of desperation unleashed a plague that turned an entire region into a festering hellscape, and who waits still in the heart of that rot for a brother who will never return. Miquella himself, the most enigmatic of all, the Empyrean who rejected the Golden Order's inadequacies and sought to create a new age free from the outer god's influence, who grew a new Erdtree watered with his own blood, who discovered that the Golden Order could not cure his sister's rot or his own curse of eternal childhood, and who ultimately vanished into the Haligtree, leaving behind only questions and the fanatical devotion of his followers. Ranni, the witch who orchestrated the Night of Black Knives, who had Godwyn assassinated to kill her own body and escape the Greater Will's control, who now schemes to replace the Golden Order with an age of stars and moon, an age where the gods are distant and humanity is free to chart its own course, for better or worse. These are not simple villains or straightforward heroes, but deeply realized characters whose motivations are comprehensible even when their actions are monstrous, and the game trusts you to piece together their stories from fragments to understand that there are no clear answers about who was right or wrong, only the cascading consequences of choices made by flawed. In the ancient past, long before the Golden Order and the reign of Queen Marika, the lands between existed in a state of primordial chaos. This was the age of the Crucible, a time when the very concept of life as we understand it today was fundamentally different. The Crucible itself was not the gleaming golden Erdtree that would later dominate the landscape, but rather a raw, churning wellspring of existence, where all forms of life were blended together in an undifferentiated mass. Think of it as the cosmic soup from which everything would eventually emerge, a biological and spiritual cauldron where the boundaries between species, between plant and animal, between flesh and spirit, simply did not exist in any meaningful way. During this primordial era, life manifested in ways that would seem grotesque or aberrant to those living under the later Golden Order. The Crucible did not create neat, separate categories of beings. Instead, creatures emerged bearing features from multiple life forms simultaneously. You might encounter a being with scales and feathers, or something that was part beast, part plant, part something else entirely. This was not considered corruption or mutation in the age of the Crucible. This was simply the natural state of existence. The energy radiating from the Crucible was so potent, so fundamentally creative, that it resisted any attempt at order or categorization. Everything that lived drew from this same chaotic wellspring, and everything bore the marks of that origin. The power of the Crucible was not merely theoretical or spiritual. Those who embraced its primal energies, who opened themselves to its raw creative force, found themselves transformed in profound ways. These transformations manifested most visibly as bestial features, physical alterations that granted enhanced capabilities. A warrior might develop horns that could gore enemies, or a tail that provided balance and could be used as a weapon, or wings that allowed brief flight. These were not curses but blessings, marks of the Crucible's favor. The closer one's connection to the Crucible, the more pronounced these features became. In this age, such mutations were signs of strength and divine approval, a stark contrast to how they would later be viewed under the Golden Order's rigid hierarchy. But the Crucible was not the only power in the lands between during this ancient time. The skies belonged to the ancient dragons, magnificent and terrible beings whose scales were harder than stone and whose breath could reduce armies to ash. These dragons were not mere beasts. They possessed intelligence, culture, and most importantly, a connection to cosmic forces that rivaled the Crucible itself. The greatest among them was Dragon Lord Placidusax, a creature of such immense power that he ruled over all the lands between from his seat in Farum Azula, the crumbling Tempest City that floated above the world. Placidusax was not simply a powerful dragon. He held the title of Elden Lord, a position that would later be held by Marika's consorts, which meant he was married to a god. This god that Placidusax served and loved has since fled, vanished from the lands between entirely, leaving behind only absence and unanswered questions. We do not know this god's name or nature, only that they commanded the loyalty of the ancient dragons, and that their departure left a wound in the cosmic order that is never fully healed. Placidusax himself, in his grief and devotion, entered a state of timeless slumber, waiting in Farum Azula for his god's return, a return that may never come. The ancient dragons worshipped what they understood to be the greater will, an outer god whose influence shaped reality itself. The greater will, as the dragons knew it, represented a kind of cosmic order, but one very different from the Golden Order that would later claim the same divine authority. The relationship between the Crucible and the ancient dragon's cosmic order was complex and not entirely harmonious. While the dragons represented a kind of elemental hierarchy, with Placidusax at its apex, the Crucible represented something more fundamental and chaotic. Yet both coexisted during this age, each shaping different aspects of the world. The dragons commanded the skies and the storms, their lightning scarring the earth and their roars shaking mountains. The Crucible churned below, constantly generating new forms of life, new possibilities, new chaos. Among the warriors who emerged during this primordial age were the Crucible Knights, champions who understood how to draw power directly from the primal source. These were not ordinary soldiers, or even exceptional fighters. They were something more, individuals who had learned to channel the Crucible's energy through their very beings. The 16 original Crucible Knights became legendary figures, each one a walking testament to the power of the primordial age. Their combat abilities were extraordinary, combining martial skill with the raw, transformative power of the Crucible itself. In battle, a Crucible Knight might sprout wings to leap impossible distances, or manifest a tail to sweep aside multiple foes, or grow horns to deliver devastating charges. The armor worn by these knights was not forged in any conventional sense. Instead, it was created from the very essence of the crucible, somehow solidified and shaped into protective plates that bonded with the wearer. This armor granted immense resilience, turning aside blows that would shatter normal steel and protecting the knight from both physical and magical attacks. The process of creating such armor has been lost to time, another secret of the primordial age that the Golden Order either could not or would not preserve. Each suit of Crucible Knight armor was unique, bearing subtle differences that reflected the individual knight's connection to the Crucible. Some pieces incorporated actual organic elements, scales or horns, or other bestial features, blurring the line between equipment and living tissue. The Crucible Knights served as champions and protectors, but their loyalty was to the Crucible itself, rather than to any particular ruler or kingdom. They were wandering heroes in an age when the concept of stable kingdoms barely existed, when power was measured by one's connection to primal forces rather than by territory or bloodline. These knights would later serve the Erdtree and the Golden Order, but in doing so, they became relics of a bygone age, their powers viewed with suspicion by those who preferred the rigid categories and hierarchies of Marika's rule. The influence of other outer gods also permeated this ancient age. The Formless Mother, an entity associated with blood and wounds and the ecstatic pain of violence, had already established a presence in the lands between. This outer god's nature was particularly compatible with the chaotic energy of the Crucible, as both represented forces that defied neat categorization and control. The Formless Mother's influence manifested in various ways, but perhaps most significantly in the beings who would later be called omens. These individuals were born bearing horns and other mutations, physical features that mark them as touched by powers beyond normal understanding. In the age of the Crucible, these omens were not outcasts or objects of disgust. Instead, they were seen as blessed, as individuals who bore visible proof of the Crucible's favor. Their horns were not deformities, but crowns, marks of their connection to the primordial source of all life. The more pronounced an omen's features, the more they were respected and even revered. This perspective would undergo a complete reversal under the Golden Order, when omens would be imprisoned, mutilated, and treated as cursed beings whose very existence was an affront to the natural order. But in this ancient time, before the Erdtree's dominance, they walked freely and held positions of honor. The relationship between the Formless Mother and the Crucible remains a matter of scholarly debate among those few who study such ancient history. Some believe the Formless Mother was simply another aspect of the Crucible's chaotic creativity, while others argue she was a distinct outer god whose sphere of influence merely overlapped with the Crucible's domain. What is clear is that both represented forces of transformation and mutation, powers that resisted the kind of stable, hierarchical order that would characterize later ages. Another ancient power that predated the Erdtree's dominance was the giant's flame, a destructive force of such intensity that it posed a genuine threat to the cosmic order itself. This was not ordinary fire. The giant's flame burned with a primal fury that could consume not just physical matter, but spiritual essence as well. It represented an alternative path for the world, a different kind of cosmic order based on destruction and renewal through flame, rather than the eternal stasis the Erdtree would later impose. The flame existed in the mountaintops of the giants, a frigid realm that seems paradoxical as the home of such intense heat. But the contradiction itself speaks to the flame's fundamental nature as a force that defies normal logic. The fire giants who guarded this flame were not mere servants, but devoted worshippers of the fell god, an outer god whose nature was intrinsically tied to the destructive power of fire. The fell god manifested through the flame, and the flame was the fell god's physical presence in the world. The fire giants themselves were massive beings, towering over normal humans, with a single eye in the center of their chests that served as both a weakness and a connection to their god. These giants understood that the flame they guarded represented a fundamental cosmic principle, one that stood in opposition to the kind of eternal golden age that other powers sought to establish. The relationship between the fell god and the crucible was one of coexistence rather than cooperation. The flame existed as its own sphere of influence, separate from the crucible's domain of chaotic life generation. Yet both represented primordial forces that would later be suppressed or controlled by the Golden Order. The fire giants maintained their vigil over the flame, knowing that it must never be allowed to die completely, but also that it must be contained, kept from consuming the entire world in its purifying fire. Even in this ancient age, certain bloodlines and tribes were establishing themselves, laying the foundations for dynasties that would persist for millennia. The ancestors of Star Scourge Radagon, who would much later become one of Queen Marika's demigod children, were already present as the Redmanes, a prominent warrior tribe, known for their martial prowess and their affinity for fire-based combat techniques. The Redmanes were not connected to the fire giants or the fell god, but they understood fire as a weapon and a tool, harnessing it in ways that complemented their aggressive fighting style. The Redmane warriors developed a culture that celebrated strength and valor in battle above all else. They were nomadic in these early times, moving across the lands between in great warband migrations, seeking worthy opponents and testing themselves against the various powers and creatures that populated the primordial world. Their techniques with fire were not magical in the sense of drawing on divine power, but rather represented a deep practical understanding of how to weaponize flame, how to coat weapons in burning oils, how to create explosive mixtures, how to use fire to control a battlefield. This practical, martial approach would characterize the Redmane tradition for generations to come. The Age of the Crucible was not a peaceful time, despite its distance from the wars and intrigues that would later consume the lands between. Different factions, each drawing on different sources of primordial power, constantly vied for dominance and territory. The ancient dragons sought to maintain their aerial supremacy and their connection to their absent god. The Crucible Knights championed the raw, transformative power of the primordial wellspring. The fire giants guarded their flame against any who might seek to extinguish or steal it. Various tribes and bloodlines, including the Redmanes, carved out territories and established their own traditions and power structures. These conflicts were not the organized wars of later ages, with armies and sieges and political maneuvering. Instead, they were more primal, more direct. Champions would face each other in single combat that could reshape landscapes. Dragons would descend from the sky to claim territories, driving out or destroying whatever forces currently held them. The crucible itself would sometimes spawn new forms of life that disrupted existing power balances, forcing everyone to adapt or perish. It was an age of constant flux, where power was never secure and where the strong survived while the weak were absorbed back into the crucible to be remade into something else. Yet despite this chaos, or perhaps because of it, the age of the crucible was a time of incredible vitality and possibility. Life in all its forms flourished, even if individual lives were often short and violent. The world was young and still discovering what it could become. Every being that emerged from the crucible represented a new experiment, a new possibility for existence. Some of these experiments failed and vanished. Others succeeded and propagated, establishing new species and bloodlines that would persist long after the crucible itself was supplanted. The end of the age of the crucible came not through conquest or cataclysm, but through transformation. The crucible itself began to change, its chaotic energies gradually coalescing and organizing themselves into something more structured. This nascent Erdtree, still primitive compared to the golden colossus it would eventually become, represented a fundamental shift in cosmic order. Where the crucible had been all about mixture and chaos and infinite possibility, the Erdtree began to impose categories and hierarchies. It separated life into distinct forms, established clear boundaries between species, and created a structure that would eventually become the Golden Order. This transition was gradual, taking place over centuries, or perhaps millennia. The crucible did not disappear overnight, but rather slowly transformed, its raw creative power being channeled and directed rather than allowed to flow freely. Those who had drawn power from the crucible found their abilities changing, becoming more structured and less wild. The bestial features that had once been marks of blessing became increasingly rare, viewed with growing suspicion by those who aligned themselves with the emerging order. The age of the crucible was ending, and with it, an entire way of understanding existence was passing into history, remembered only in fragments and relics, and the increasingly marginalized traditions of those who still honored the primordial source of all life. The crucible's chaotic vitality would not reign forever. In the distant past, during what scholars now call the cosmic shift, an event of staggering magnitude reshaped the very foundation of reality in the lands between. An outer god, a being existing beyond the comprehension of mortals and dwelling in the spaces between stars, turned its attention toward this realm. This entity, known as the Greater Will, possessed ambitions that transcended mere observation. It sought dominion, order, and the imposition of its cosmic design upon a world that had known only the wild, untamed fusion of the crucible. The greater will did not descend itself. Instead, it dispatched an emissary, a living instrument of its power. This vassal took the form of the Elden Beast, a creature that defied conventional understanding. Witnesses, if any truly existed to record the moment, would have seen a golden star plummeting from the heavens, tearing through the firmament with purpose rather than chance. The Elden Beast was not merely a messenger. It was a living manifestation of divine will, a golden entity whose very existence bridged the gap between the abstract concepts of cosmic law and the tangible reality of the physical world. Its arrival marked the beginning of an upheaval that would echo through every subsequent age. When the Elden Beast descended upon the lands between, it did not come to conquer through violence alone, though violence would certainly follow. Its primary function was transformation. The creature carried within itself the fundamental structure of what would become the Elden Ring, a metaphysical framework of runes and laws that would govern existence itself. The Elden Beast became the living embodiment of this ring, merging with it so completely that the two became indistinguishable. Where the crucible had allowed all things to blend and merge in chaotic harmony, the Elden Ring would impose boundaries, hierarchies, and definitions. It introduced the very concept of order as a governing principle, something the lands between had never truly known. This was not a simple magical artifact or a crown to be worn. The Elden Ring, through the Elden Beast's integration with the realm, became etched into the fundamental fabric of reality in the lands between. It was written into the stones, the waters, the air itself. The ring dictated the laws of life and death, the flow of souls, the nature of grace, and the structure of existence. Where once there had been only the organic chaos of the crucible's endless transformations, there now emerged rules, patterns, and predictable outcomes. Cause and effect became more rigid. The boundaries between species became more defined. The concept of a natural order, with its hierarchies and its designated roles for every living thing, began to crystallize. From this cosmic restructuring emerged what would eventually be called the Golden Order, though in these early days it was more a nascent force than a fully realized philosophy. The Golden Order represented the greater will's vision made manifest, a system of laws both physical and metaphysical that would govern how life, death, and rebirth functioned. It began to supplant the age of the crucible, not through sudden replacement, but through gradual dominance. The crucible, that primordial form of the Erdtree's grace, where all life blended together in a chaotic soup of potential, came to be seen through a new lens. What had once been the source of all vitality and possibility was now being reframed as primitive, unrefined, and in need of correction. This transition was not peaceful, nor was it universally welcomed. The lands between already had its rulers, its gods, and its established powers. Chief among these were the ancient dragons, magnificent beings who had reigned supreme for untold ages. These dragons were not mere beasts. They were intelligent, powerful, and worshipped as divine entities by those who understood their might. At the apex of dragon civilization stood Dragon Lord Placidusax, a being of such immense power that he served as Elden Lord in an age before the current understanding of that title even existed. Placidusax was lord to a god whose identity has been lost to time, erased, or forgotten in the cosmic upheavals that followed. The dragon's reign represented a different form of order, one built on raw elemental power and ancient authority. Their civilization had developed its own systems, its own understanding of the world's structure. The ancient dragons commanded lightning, that primal red lightning that predated even the golden bolts that would later become associated with the Erdtree's power. They had their own rituals, their own hierarchies, their own relationship with the fundamental forces of the world. They were, in every meaningful sense, the gods of their age. But the arrival of the Elden Beast and the establishment of the Elden Ring challenged everything the dragons represented. The Greater Will's influence was not content to share dominion or to coexist with rival powers. The new cosmic order demanded supremacy, and the dragons, despite their might, found themselves facing a force that operated on a different level entirely. This was not merely a conflict of armies or even of magic. It was a clash of fundamental principles, of competing visions for how reality itself should function. The war, if it can be called such, was more an erosion than a battle. The dragon's power, formidable as it was, could not stand against the systematic restructuring of reality that the Elden Ring represented. Their ancient god, the deity Placidusax served, disappeared. Whether this god fled, was destroyed, or simply ceased to exist, under the new cosmic laws remains one of the great mysteries of the lands between. Placidusax himself, rather than face final defeat, entered a state between time and space, waiting in Farum Azula, the crumbling dragon city that exists outside the normal flow of temporal reality. He awaits still, in eternal vigil, for the return of a god who may never come. The other ancient dragons faced their own reckonings. Some retreated to remote places, to mountaintops and hidden sanctuaries where the reach of the new order was less absolute. Others were subjugated, brought into the fold of the emerging Golden Order as subordinate powers rather than sovereign rulers. The dragons who had once been worshipped as gods themselves were reduced to obstacles, to powerful creatures certainly, but no longer the supreme arbiters of the world's fate. Their red lightning, that ancient destructive force, would be overshadowed by the golden lightning that came to represent the Erdtree's might. As the dragon's influence waned, another symbol of the greater will's power began its inexorable rise. The Erdtree, that colossal golden tree, visible from every corner of the lands between, began its growth. The relationship between the Erdtree and the Crucible is complex and layered with irony. The Erdtree was, in some sense, an evolution or transformation of the Crucible itself, yet it represented everything the Crucible was not. Where the Crucible had been a melting pot, a place where all life merged and intermingled without distinction, the Erdtree was a hierarchy made manifest. It grew upward, reaching toward the heavens, as its structure inherently suggesting ascension, order, and separation into distinct levels. The Erdtree drew its sustenance from the lands between itself, its roots reaching deep into the earth, pulling vitality from the very substance of the world. This was not parasitism in the conventional sense, but rather a transformation of the relationship between land and divine power. The Erdtree became the axis around which all life revolved. Souls, upon death, would return to the Erdtree to be absorbed and potentially reborn. This cycle of death and rebirth, governed by the Erdtree's grace, became the new natural order, replacing whatever systems had existed before. With the Erdtree came the concept of grace, a golden blessing that would become central to the Golden Order's theology and practice. Grace was presented as a gift from the greater will, a guiding light that marked individuals chosen for special purpose. Those touched by grace could see golden light emanating from certain directions, pointing them toward their destiny as the greater will conceived it. This grace was selective, bestowed upon those deemed worthy by the cosmic order, and its presence or absence became a mark of divine favor or disfavor. The tarnished, those who would later lose their grace and be exiled, would find their entire identity defined by this absence. The transformation was not merely political or religious, but philosophical. The crucible of the primordial Erdtree, that original state of chaotic fusion, began to be reinterpreted through the lens of the new order. What had once been celebrated as the source of all life's vitality and diversity was now seen as imperfect, as a chaotic and unrefined past that the Golden Order had transcended. The aspects of the crucible, those primal powers that allowed beings to sprout horns, tails, wings, and other features from different species, came to be viewed with suspicion and even disgust. The Crucible Knights, warriors who had once been honored for their connection to these primal powers, would later find themselves marginalized, their abilities seen as remnants of a barbaric age. This shift in perspective was not accidental, but deliberate. The Golden Order required a narrative of progress, of improvement over what came before. By casting the Crucible as primitive and chaotic, the New Order justified its own existence and its systematic suppression of alternative powers and philosophies. The Omen, individuals born with Crucible-like features, would become among the most persecuted groups in later ages, their very existence a reminder of the primordial past that the Golden Order sought to transcend and forget. The Greater Will's ascendancy also meant the suppression or marginalization of other outer gods who had their own designs on the lands between. These entities, existing beyond conventional reality, like the Greater Will itself, had cultivated their own influences and followings. The fell god of the giants, a deity of destructive flame worshipped by the fire giants of the mountaintops, found its power checked by the new cosmic order. The giants, who had tended the flame of ruin, a fire capable of burning even the Erdtree itself, would later face near genocide as the Golden Order consolidated its power. But even in these early days, the message was clear. The Greater Will would tolerate no rivals, no competing sources of divine authority. Other outer gods, the formless mother who would grant power through blood, the dark moon that would influence the Carrion royal family, the frenzied flame that sought to melt all distinctions back into chaotic oneness, all found their influence constrained by the Elden Ring's fundamental restructuring of reality. They could still touch the world, still grant power to their followers, but they could no longer reshape the basic laws of existence as the Greater Will had done. The cosmic playing field had been fundamentally altered in favor of one player, and all others would have to operate within or against the system that player had established. With the Elden Beast's arrival and its transformation into the Elden Ring complete, the Greater Will required a mortal champion to enact its vision for the lands between. In the ancient era, as the Golden Age began to dawn, the outer god made its choice. Among the Numen, a race of long lived humanoids who had journeyed from distant lands beyond the fog. There existed a woman named Marika. The Greater Will selected her as its Empyrean, a being possessing the rare potential to ascend to godhood and serve as a vessel for divine power. This selection was no arbitrary decision. Marika possessed qualities that set her apart: ambition, strength, and an unwavering will that mirrored the cosmic force that had chosen her. The process of becoming an Empyrean was itself transformative, marking Marika as something more than human, yet not quite divine, a liminal state that prepared her for what was to come. The Greater Will bestowed upon Marika the Elden Ring itself, the crystallized manifestation of order that the Elden Beast had become. In accepting this burden, Marika underwent a fundamental transformation. She became the vessel, the living container for the Elden Ring, which resided within her very being. This was not merely a symbolic union, but a literal merging of mortal flesh and cosmic law. The Elden Ring's runes, each representing a fundamental aspect of existence, death, life, causality, became part of Marika's essence. Through this union, she ascended to true godhood, becoming Queen Marika, the Eternal. Her body became a conduit through which the Greater Will's order could flow into the physical world, reshaping reality according to divine principles. The power coursing through her was immeasurable, granting her abilities that transcended mortal comprehension. She could alter the fundamental laws of the lands between, rewrite the rules that governed life and death, and impose her will upon the very fabric of existence. With this newfound divinity, Marika set about establishing a new paradigm for the lands between. She founded the Golden Order, a comprehensive religious and political system that would serve as the foundation for her reign. The Golden Order was far more than a simple faith or government. It represented a complete cosmological framework, a way of understanding and organizing reality itself. At its core lay the principle of causality, the belief that all things followed predictable patterns ordained by the Greater Will. The Golden Order codified these patterns into law, both natural and civil. It established hierarchies of being, placing those touched by grace, the golden light of the Erdtree, above all others. It defined proper conduct, proper thought, even proper existence. Scholars and clerics began to study the intricacies of Golden Order fundamentalism, developing complex theological and philosophical systems to explain and justify Marika's rule. Central to this new order was the Erdtree itself. Fed by the power of the Elden Ring that resided within Marika, the great tree began to grow beyond its initial form. It stretched upward, its golden boughs reaching toward the heavens, its roots delving deep into the earth. The Erdtree became a physical manifestation of the Golden Order's dominance, visible from every corner of the lands between. Its light bathed the realm in a golden glow, and its presence could be felt by all who lived beneath its branches. The tree served multiple purposes in Marika's design. It was a symbol of her authority, a source of grace that marked the chosen, and a mechanism for controlling the cycle of life and death. Those who died in the lands between would have their souls return to the Erdtree, absorbed into its roots, only to be reborn again in an endless cycle. This system ensured that death itself became subject to the Golden Order's control, removing the finality that had once defined mortality. But Marika's vision for the lands between could not be realized through divine mandate alone. There were forces in the realm that predated her ascension, powers that refused to bow to the Golden Order. Chief among these were the fire giants, a race of enormous beings who dwelt in the frigid mountain tops of the giants, far to the north. These giants were not merely large humans, but a distinct species, towering creatures with red hair and immense strength. They worshipped their own deity, the Fell God, a malevolent entity of flame and destruction that stood in direct opposition to the greater will's vision of order. The giants tended the flame of ruin, a primordial fire that burned atop the mountain, a flame that possessed the terrible power to burn the Erdtree itself. This flame represented an existential threat to everything Marika had built. As long as it burned, as long as the giants maintained their vigil, the Golden Order could never be truly secure. Marika understood that coexistence with such a threat was impossible. She initiated a campaign of extermination against the fire giants, a war of annihilation that would become one of the defining conflicts of the early Golden Age. This was not a war of conquest or subjugation, but of complete eradication. Marika gathered her forces, warriors who had sworn allegiance to the Golden Order, and marched north into the frozen wastes. The war against the giants was brutal and protracted. The fire giants were formidable opponents, wielding their flame magic and immense physical strength against Marika's armies. They fought not just for territory or resources, but for their very survival, for the preservation of their god and their way of life. Marika herself took to the battlefield, demonstrating that her godhood was not merely spiritual, but martial as well. She wielded a great hammer, a weapon befitting her divine status, and personally led the charge against the giants. Her presence on the battlefield was transformative, inspiring her followers and striking terror into her enemies. The goddess queen fought with a ferocity that belied her regal bearing, crushing giants beneath her hammer, her golden power blazing across the frozen landscape. One by one, the fire giants fell. Their settlements were destroyed, their people slaughtered, their culture systematically erased. Marika showed no mercy, for mercy would have meant allowing a threat to the Golden Order to persist. The war culminated in a final confrontation with the last of the fire giants, their leader and the final guardian of the flame of ruin. This giant, larger and more powerful than any of his kin, stood alone against Marika and her forces. The battle was cataclysmic, shaking the very mountains. Fire and gold clashed in a display of divine and primordial power. But ultimately, even this mightiest of giants could not stand against a goddess. Marika defeated him, striking him down with her hammer. Yet she did not grant him the mercy of death. Instead, she cursed him with a fate far crueler. He was condemned to eternal life, bound to the forge of the giants, forced to forever tend the very flame of ruin that his people had protected. This curse served multiple purposes. It ensured that the flame would not go out, which might have had unforeseen consequences, but it also meant that the flame was now under the indirect control of the Golden Order, guarded by a broken, defeated giant who could never again threaten Marika's rule. The fell god itself, the deity that the fire giants had worshipped, did not escape Marika's wrath. Through means both martial and mystical, she sealed the fell god within the body of the last fire giant. The god of flame became a prisoner in the flesh of its final worshipper, unable to manifest its power, unable to aid its people, reduced to nothing more than a presence locked away with an accursed guardian. This sealing represented a complete victory for the Golden Order. Not only had Marika destroyed the fire giants as a people, but she had also neutralized their god, demonstrating that even divine powers could be subjugated by the greater will's chosen vessel. With the threat from the north eliminated, Marika turned her attention to another ancient power that predated the Erdtree's dominance. The ancient dragons, led by the dragon lord Placidusax, represented a civilization that had flourished in the lands between long before the Greater Will's arrival. These were not the lesser dragons that would later serve the Golden Order, but primordial beings of immense power, creatures whose very existence was intertwined with the fundamental forces of the world. Placidusax himself had once served as Elden Lord to a god of his own, a deity whose identity had been lost to time, fled, or vanished before Marika's ascension. The ancient dragons possessed mastery over red lightning, a destructive force that could rend stone and flesh alike. They made their home in Farum Azula, a massive temple city that existed outside the normal flow of time, floating in a storm beyond the edge of the world. The conflict between Marika and the ancient dragons was perhaps inevitable. The dragons represented an old order, a previous age when different powers had held sway over the lands between. Their continued existence and independence challenged the Golden Order's claim to absolute authority. Moreover, the dragons possessed a knowledge and power that Marika sought to either control or eliminate. She waged war against Placidusax and his kin, a conflict that played out across both the physical realm and in places where time itself bent and twisted. The battles between goddess and dragons were legendary, reshaping landscapes and leaving scars that would persist for ages. Unlike the fire giants, however, not all dragons were destined for extermination. Marika proved capable of pragmatism when it served her purposes. Some dragons, recognizing the futility of resistance, or perhaps seeing opportunity in alliance, chose to submit to the Golden Order. Fortisax, a powerful ancient dragon whose scales gleamed with red lightning, was among those who bent the knee after being defeated in combat. Rather than destroying Fortisax, Marika accepted the dragon's allegiance. This decision established a precedent that would shape the relationship between dragons and the Golden Order for generations to come. Dragons who submitted were granted positions of honor within the new hierarchy, their power channeled toward the Golden Order's purposes rather than against it. Lanceax, another ancient dragon of considerable might, went even further in her accommodation to the new order. She possessed the rare ability to assume human form, a transformation that allowed her to move among mortals without the fear and hostility that her true appearance would provoke. In this human guise, Lanceax became a priestess of the Golden Order, serving Marika's vision with the same dedication she had once shown to the ancient dragon civilization. She taught incantations that channeled the power of ancient dragon lightning, but now these teachings were framed within the context of Golden Order fundamentalism. The red lightning that had once been a weapon against Marika's forces became a tool in service of her rule. Lanceax's transformation, both literal and ideological, represented the Golden Order's ability to assimilate even the most ancient powers into its structure. Through these conquests and alliances, the Golden Order's influence expanded inexorably across the lands between. Region by region, people by people, The old ways were either destroyed or transformed to fit Marika's vision. Local faiths were suppressed or incorporated into Golden Order theology. Independent kingdoms and tribes were brought under the Erdtree's sway, either through diplomacy, backed by the threat of divine retribution, or through outright military conquest. The grace of the Erdtree, visible as golden light in the eyes of the chosen, became the mark of legitimacy. Those who could see the guidance of grace were elevated, while those who could not were relegated to lesser status. This system created a rigid hierarchy that reinforced Marika's authority at every level of society. The establishment of Leyndell as the capital of this new order symbolized the consolidation of Marika's power. The city, built at the foot of the Erdtree itself, became the heart of the Golden Order's political and religious authority. Its walls enclosed not just a city, but the center of a new world order. Within Leyndell, Marika established her court, surrounding herself with those who had proven their loyalty and usefulness. Knights sworn to defend the Erdtree, scholars dedicated to studying and codifying Golden Order fundamentalism, clerics who spread the faith to distant corners of the realm, all found their place in the capital. The city's very architecture reflected the values of the Golden Order, with everything oriented toward the Erdtree, every structure designed to reinforce the sense of divine hierarchy and cosmic order. Marika's reign ushered in what would be remembered as the Golden Age, a period of unprecedented prosperity and stability in the lands between. The constant warfare that had characterized earlier eras gave way to a peace enforced by the overwhelming power of the Golden Order. Trade flourished along roads protected by Marika's knights. Scholarship advanced as the study of Golden Order fundamentalism attracted the brightest minds. The arts thrived under the patronage of a goddess queen who understood the power of culture in maintaining authority. For those who accepted the Golden Order's precepts, who could see the guidance of grace, life in the lands between reached heights of comfort and security previously unimaginable. Yet this golden age was built upon foundations of conquest and subjugation. The fire giants had been exterminated, their culture erased, their god imprisoned. The ancient dragons had been defeated, their civilization reduced to scattered remnants and subordinate allies. Countless smaller peoples and faiths had been swept aside or forcibly converted. The very laws of nature had been rewritten to serve the greater will's vision as interpreted by Marika. Death itself had been transformed from a final ending into a cycle controlled by the Erdtree, robbing mortality of its meaning. The Golden Age was golden indeed for those who dwelt in its light, but it cast long shadows across the lands between, shadows that would eventually give birth to forces that would challenge even a goddess's authority. The establishment of the Golden Order by Marika marked a pivotal shift in the lands between, ushering in an era of unprecedented expansion and consolidation. This period, known as the Golden Age, or the Age of Conquest, saw the nascent Golden Order solidify its dominion, largely through the efforts of its first champion. It was during this time, following Marika's ascension, that the greater will, the outer god overseeing the lands between, chose Marika, an Empyrean, to be its divine instrument. Empyreans, born to a single god, are candidates to become gods themselves, possessing the potential to succeed their divine parent. Marika, chosen for this sacred role, became a god, her divine essence intrinsically linked to the burgeoning power of the Erdtree. The Erdtree itself, a colossal golden-hued tree that dominates the skyline of the lands between, was not merely a natural wonder. It was the physical manifestation and primary symbol of the Golden Order's dominion, its roots delving deep into the earth, its branches reaching towards the heavens, embodying the Order's pervasive influence. With her divine status secured and the Erdtree firmly established as the Golden Order's beacon, Marika required a consort, a mortal champion, to lead her armies thus and solidify her rule. This is where Godfrey enters the narrative, though he was not always known by that name. Before his elevation, he was Huara chieftain of the Badlands, a name that resonated with primal power and untamed ferocity. The Badlands, a harsh and unforgiving territory beyond the immediate influence of the Erdtree, had forged Huara into a warrior of unparalleled strength and a leader of formidable will. He was, in essence, the antithesis of the refined golden aesthetic often associated with the Erdtree, a raw, unbridled force of nature. It was this very untamed spirit, this inherent power that drew Marika to him. He was not a tarnished, in the conventional sense at this point, but his eventual fate would inextricably link him to that lineage. Upon becoming Marika's consort, Huara shed his old identity, or at least subsumed it, and was reborn as Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. This title, Elden Lord, designated him as the sovereign ruler alongside Marika, a figure of immense authority and military prowess. Godfrey's role as first Elden Lord was largely defined by conquest. He led Marika's armies, a formidable force imbued with the grace of the Erdtree, in a series of relentless campaigns that systematically expanded the Golden Order's dominion across the vast and diverse lands between. These conquests were not mere skirmishes. They were transformative events that reshaped the political and geographical landscape of the realm. One of his most significant early campaigns was against the Stormvale Kingdom, a proud and ancient civilization ruled by the Stormhawks. This conflict, marked by fierce aerial battles and brutal ground engagements, ultimately saw the Stormvale Kingdom fall, its territories absorbed into the burgeoning Golden Order. The legacy of this war, particularly the defeat of the Stormhawks, solidified Godfrey's reputation as an unstoppable force. Another crucial conquest involved the subjugation of the Fire Giants, a race of colossal beings who dwelled in the treacherous mountaintops of the giants and wielded formidable pyromancy. This was a particularly arduous campaign, as the Fire Giants were not easily subdued, their ancient power and resilience posing a significant challenge even to Godfrey's might. It is said that Godfrey himself, in a display of his legendary strength, personally slew the last remaining Fire Giant, sealing their fate and claiming their sacred forge for the Golden Order. This victory not only expanded the Golden Order's territorial reach, but also eliminated a powerful, independent force that could have threatened its supremacy. These campaigns, among many others, were characterized by Godfrey's unwavering determination and his almost superhuman strength. His ferocity in battle was legendary, a primal roar that struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. He was a force of nature on the battlefield, a whirlwind of steel and muscle, leading from the front and inspiring his soldiers to acts of incredible bravery. This ferocity, a remnant of his Huara persona, was both his greatest asset and eventually a source of concern. In time, Godfrey and Marika had children, forging the beginnings of a divine lineage that would profoundly shape the destiny of the lands between. Their firstborn was Godwyn the Golden, a demigod of immense promise and charisma. Godwyn was born with a radiant golden aura, embodying the ideals of the Golden Order and quickly becoming a beloved figure throughout the realm. His birth marked the establishment of the Golden Lineage, a direct succession of demigods descended from the union of a god and an Elden Lord. This lineage was intended to uphold and perpetuate the Golden Order, ensuring its continued prosperity and dominance. Godwyn, in particular, was seen as the epitome of this new era, a symbol of hope and unity. However, the divine union also yielded children who did not fit the pristine image of the Golden Order. Marika and Godfrey also bore the Omen twins, Mog and Morgoth. These demigods were born with the physical manifestations of the Omen curse, a condition often associated with horns, tails, and other monstrous features, which were considered anathema to the Golden Order's aesthetic of perfection. Despite being the direct offspring of Marika and Godfrey, Mog and Morgoth were shunned and ostracized due to their Omen heritage. This rejection highlights the inherent hypocrisy within the Golden Order, which preached unity and divine grace, but actively discriminated against those who did not conform to its narrow ideals. Mog, in particular, would grow to resent this treatment, his bitterness festering and eventually leading him down a path of rebellion and worship of an outer god known as the Formless Mother. Morgoth, despite his Omen curse, remained fiercely loyal to the Erdtree and the Golden Order, serving as its hidden protector, a testament to the complex and often tragic nature of their lineage. It was during this period of intense conquest and the establishment of his family that Godfrey's inherent ferocity, his untamed Huara self, became a significant factor. His bloodlust on the battlefield was so profound, so overwhelming, that it threatened to consume him entirely. To temper this primal urge, his spirit became intertwined with a majestic beast companion named Serosh. Serosh, a regal lion-like creature, served as a living restraint, a constant presence that helped Godfrey control his savage instincts. This symbiotic relationship was crucial in maintaining Godfrey's composure and preventing his inner beast from overwhelming his judgment, allowing him to remain a strategic and effective leader rather than a berserker. Serosh would often rest upon Godfrey's shoulders, a visible symbol of his controlled power, a reminder of the delicate balance between his human and beastly natures. The era of Godfrey's conquests, while undeniably successful in expanding the Golden Order's reach, was also a period of immense upheaval and subjugation. Many independent peoples and ancient cultures were either assimilated into the Golden Order or utterly crushed. The ancient dragons, once proud rulers of the lands between, were largely defeated and their power curtailed, though some, like Fortisax, would form pacts with the Golden Order. The various tribes and kingdoms that existed prior to Marika's rise were forced to bend the knee or face annihilation. This systematic expansion, driven by Godfrey's military might, established the Golden Order as the dominant power, its influence stretching from the coastal regions to the highest mountain peaks. The assimilation of these lands and peoples, while framed as bringing order and divine grace, often involved violent suppression and the imposition of Golden Order beliefs and practices. However, even the greatest of champions eventually fulfills their purpose. As the Golden Order's dominion became firmly established and its territories consolidated, Godfrey's role as a conqueror began to diminish. His relentless campaigns had achieved their objective, and the lands between were largely unified under the Erdtree's banner. With no more significant foes to conquer, no more lands to claim, Godfrey's immense power and inherent ferocity became, in a strange twist of fate, a liability. The greater will, through Marika, deemed that Godfrey's purpose was fulfilled. He had served his function as the sword of the Golden Order, but the era of conquest was over. A new era, one of stability and divine rule, was dawning, and Godfrey's warrior spirit, his untamed nature, no longer fit within this evolving vision. Thus, in a shocking and deeply significant act, Godfrey was stripped of his grace. Grace, in the context of the lands between, is the blessing of the Erdtree, the gating light bestowed upon individuals by the greater will. To be stripped of grace meant to lose this divine favor, to be cut off from the very essence of the Golden Order's power. This act of stripping his grace also meant that he was exiled from the lands between, cast out from the very realm he had helped to forge. He became the first tarnished, a term that would later come to define a lineage of individuals who had lost the Erdtree's grace and were destined to wander. Godfrey, along with his loyal warriors, who had also lost their grace, was cast out into the desolate Badlands, the very place from which he had originated as Huaralu. This exile was not merely a physical removal, it was a spiritual severing, a profound rejection by the divine power he had served so faithfully. He and his warriors were sent to live and die in the Badlands, their guidance of grace taken, their purpose seemingly concluded. This act, seemingly harsh, was a calculated move by the greater will and Marika to remove a powerful yet now redundant force from the heart of the Golden Order, paving the way for a new phase in its history. The age of Godfrey, the age of conquest, had come to an end, giving way to a period of consolidation, and as we shall see, eventual decay. We now shift our gaze to a pivotal moment within the Golden Age, a period marked by both burgeoning magical discovery and escalating conflict. This is the age of Radagon and Ranni's union, a chapter that irrevocably shaped the lands between. Following the establishment of the Golden Order and Marika's initial reign, a new dynamic emerged. Queen Marika, in a move that would send ripples through the very fabric of reality, took on a new consort, Radagon. He was not just any suitor, but a celebrated champion of the Golden Order, a figure whose prowess and unwavering devotion to the Erdtree's tenets were legendary. His ascent to Marika's side solidified the Golden Order's political and spiritual dominance, intertwining its destiny even more tightly with the divine lineage. However, Radagon's union with Marika was not his first significant romantic entanglement. Before he became Marika's consort, Radagon was married to Ranni, the illustrious queen of the full moon. Ranni was no ordinary monarch. She was the reigning sovereign of the Carian royal family, a lineage steeped in arcane tradition and the mastery of sorcery. Their marriage was a monumental event, a strategic alliance born out of necessity, and perhaps a genuine connection. The Carian royal family, with its seat of power at the Academy of Raya Lucaria, had long been a formidable independent force, its magical might a counterpoint to the Golden Order's faith-based incantations. This union, therefore, brought about a fragile yet significant temporary peace between the burgeoning Golden Order and the ancient powerful Carian sorcerers. It was a truce, a cessation of hostilities that allowed for a brief period of cultural exchange and mutual, if sometimes wary, respect between two vastly different philosophical and magical traditions. The implications of such a union were far reaching, hinting at a potential synthesis of magic and faith that ultimately would never fully materialize. From this extraordinary union, three children were born, each destined to play a crucial role in the unfolding saga of the lands between. These were Rykard, Radon, and Ranni, demigods whose very existence was a testament to the blend of Golden Order, might, and carrion arcane power. Renala herself, as the last queen of the full moon, was a formidable figure, a living embodiment of the carrion royal family's magical heritage. She was a master of full moon sorcery, a powerful and ancient form of magic that drew its strength from the celestial bodies, particularly the moon. This sorcery was distinct from the Erdtree's golden incantations, relying instead on the cold, calculating logic of the cosmos and the inherent power of glintstone. Renala's mastery was unparalleled, her spells capable of conjuring illusions and unleashing devastating lunar barrages that could turn the tide of any battle. Her connection to this primeval current of magic was not merely academic, it was deeply ingrained in her being, a part of her very essence. The Carrion royal family, under Renala's astute leadership, maintained a strong and enduring connection to the primeval current and the stars. This connection was the bedrock of their power, the source of their unique sorceries, and the foundation of their philosophical worldview. Unlike the Golden Order, which looked inward to the Erdtree for guidance and power, the Carrions looked outward to the vast, unknowable expanse of the cosmos. They believed in the influence of celestial bodies, in the power of constellations, and the movements of the stars to dictate fate and unravel the mysteries of existence. This deep astronomical understanding fueled their advanced sorcery, allowing them to manipulate the very fabric of reality in ways the Golden Order could only dream of. Their academy, Raya Lucaria, was a beacon of this knowledge, a place where scholars and sorcerers alike delved into the secrets of the universe, unearthing ancient truths and forging new magical disciplines. Intriguingly, despite his staunch allegiance to the Golden Order, Radagon was known to have studied Carrion sorcery during his time with Renala. This was not a casual dalliance. It was a serious pursuit, indicating a profound intellectual curiosity and a willingness to transcend the ideological boundaries of his own faith. This detail is particularly significant, as it hints at a complexity within Radagon's character that often goes overlooked. He was not merely a rigid enforcer of the Golden Order. He was a scholar, a seeker of knowledge, even if that knowledge came from a tradition seemingly at odds with his own. This cross-pollination of magical understanding, however brief, undoubtedly influenced his later actions and perhaps even contributed to the unique nature of his children. It suggests that even within the seemingly monolithic structure of the Golden Order, there were individuals who dared to look beyond its prescribed doctrines, seeking truth in unconventional places. Their firstborn, Rykard, was a child of immense intellect and a strong, unyielding sense of justice. He was born with a keen mind and an innate desire to right wrongs, a trait that would guide his early life. He initially served as a judge, upholding the laws of the Golden Order and administering justice with a stern yet fair hand. His pursuit of truth and his unwavering commitment to his ideals were admirable, but they also hinted at a dangerous inflexibility, a willingness to push boundaries in his quest for what he perceived as righteous. This relentless pursuit of justice would eventually lead him down a path of radicalism, transforming him from a respected judge into a blasphemer, a figure who defied the very order he once served. His journey was a tragic descent, a testament to how even the noblest intentions can be twisted by circumstance and unwavering conviction. The second child, Radagon, was born a demigod of immense physical strength, a towering figure even in his youth. His destiny was clear from an early age. He was born to be a warrior, a general of unparalleled might. He inherited the martial prowess of his father, Radagon, and combined it with a fierce, almost primal power that spoke of a deeper, more ancient strength. His ambition was boundless, his courage legendary, and his loyalty to his family and his people unwavering. He was destined to become one of the most formidable generals in the lands between, a figure whose name would strike fear into the hearts of his enemies and inspire unwavering devotion in his troops. His physical prowess was matched only by his strategic brilliance, making him a truly formidable force on the battlefield. Ranni, the youngest of the three, was born an Empyrean, a chosen one destined to ascend to godhood. This designation, bestowed upon her by the two fingers, the ethereal messengers of the greater will, marked her as a figure of immense cosmic significance. Unlike her brothers, Ranni possessed a strong affinity for the moon and cold sorcery, a magical tradition deeply rooted in her mother's Carian heritage. Her connection to the lunar cycle and the chilling power of frost magic set her apart, hinting at a destiny intertwined with the celestial bodies and the ancient forgotten powers of the cosmos. Her very existence was a challenge to the Golden Order's singular focus on the Erdtree, representing an alternative path to divinity, one steeped in the mysteries of the night sky. Her quiet demeanor and her profound connection to the moon made her a figure of enigmatic power, a demigod whose true potential was yet to be fully realized. The Carian royal family's power was not merely derived from their individual members' magical prowess. It was deeply rooted in their lineage, and crucially, their control over the Academy of Raya Lucaria. This institution was not just a school of magic, it was the intellectual heart of Carian sorcery, a repository of ancient knowledge and a crucible for new magical discoveries. It was here that generations of Carian sorcerers were trained, their minds honed to unlock the secrets of the glintstone and the stars. The Academy's influence extended far beyond its walls, shaping the political landscape and ensuring the Carian royal family's continued relevance and power. Their control over the Academy gave them a monopoly on arcane knowledge, a strategic advantage that allowed them to challenge the Golden Order's spiritual authority with their own brand of cosmic wisdom. The Academy was a symbol of their enduring legacy, a testament to their unwavering commitment to the pursuit of magical enlightenment. However, this period of relative peace and interfamilial harmony was not destined to last. The Golden Age, for all its splendor, was also a time of political maneuverings and shifting allegiances. Radagon eventually left Rennala, a decision that would have catastrophic consequences for the Carian royal family and for Rennala herself. He departed from their union to become Marika's second consort, a move that publicly cemented his status as the champion of the Golden Order and her chosen partner. This departure was not a simple separation. It was a revelation of a profound and shocking truth. Radagon was, in fact, Marika's other half. This extraordinary revelation that the champion of the Golden Order and the Divine Queen were two sides of the same coin, two aspects of a single powerful entity, fundamentally altered the understanding of divinity in the lands between. It implied a self-sufficiency and an inherent duality within Marika that had previously been hidden, a secret kept for untold ages. This revelation, while strengthening Marika's divine authority, also introduced a layer of complexity and mystery to her nature, suggesting a being of immense power and perhaps even an internal conflict. Radagon's departure left Rennala utterly heartbroken and mentally fragile. The woman who had once been a formidable queen, a master of ancient sorcery, was reduced to a shadow of her former self, clinging desperately to the amber egg he had gifted her. This amber egg, containing the great rune of the unborn, was a symbol of their love, a promise of renewal and rebirth. But in her grief, it became a fragile anchor, a physical manifestation of her shattered hopes and dreams. She retreated into herself, her once sharp mind clouded by sorrow and despair. Her immense magical power, once a source of strength, now served only to sustain her in her grief, allowing her to endlessly attempt to rebirth her children, a poignant and futile endeavor. The once proud queen of the full moon was now a tragic figure, a testament to the devastating power of heartbreak and abandonment. Her mental fragility meant that the Carian royal family, while still powerful, lost its guiding hand, its central pillar of strength, leaving it vulnerable to the machinations of the Golden Order. Following Radagon's union with Marika, the Golden Order's influence expanded significantly, further solidifying its dominance across the lands between. With the champion of the Golden Order, now directly wedded to the Divine Queen, the Erdtree's authority became virtually unchallenged. This period saw the rapid expansion of Golden Order tenets, its faith spreading like wildfire, eclipsing older traditions and consolidating power under a single unified banner. The Carian royal family, weakened by Rennala's grief and the absence of Radagon, found its influence waning, its unique brand of sorcery increasingly marginalized by the pervasive reach of the Erdtree's grace. The temporary peace had given way to an undeniable shift in the balance of power, with the Golden Order emerging as the undisputed hegemon, its golden light casting long shadows over all other traditions and beliefs. This consolidation of power set the stage for the conflicts and betrayals that would define the later stages of the Golden Age and ultimately lead to its catastrophic downfall. The seeds of future discord had been sown even amidst this period of apparent triumph for the Golden Order. And so, we arrive at the precipice of our tale, the recent past, an era defined by cataclysmic upheaval and the very events that set the stage for your own journey tarnished. The tranquility, however tenuous, that had settled over the lands between was irrevocably shattered by a series of interconnected betrayals and desperate acts, all culminating in the titular event of our discussion, the shattering of the Elden Ring itself. The genesis of this cataclysm lies not with Marika's fury, but with a clandestine act of immense consequence, the theft of the Rune of Death. This fundamental component of the Elden Ring, the very aspect that governed mortality and the cycle of life and death, was spirited away by none other than Ranni, the lunar princess, a demigod daughter of Radagon and Rennala, and a powerful sorceress deeply entwined with the fate of the moon. Ranni, burdened by the golden destiny imposed upon her as a demigod, sought to escape the suffocating embrace of the greater will, the enigmatic outer god that had guided the Golden Order for millennia. Her ultimate goal was to shed her physical form, severing her ties to the Erdtree and the Golden Order's influence, and thus initiate a new age, an age of stars, under the dominion of the Dark Moon. To achieve this radical transformation, she required a specific catalyst, the death of a demigod's soul, but not their body. This morbid paradox was the key to her ritual, a means to transcend her ordained fate and carve her own path beyond the established order. Her chosen target for this grim endeavor was Godwyn the Golden, Marika's beloved firstborn son, a paragon of chivalry and the very embodiment of the Golden Order's ideals. Godwyn represented everything Ranni sought to dismantle, his very existence a testament to the oppressive, predetermined path she so desperately wished to escape. The plot, meticulously orchestrated by Ranni and her conspirators, was designed to exploit the stolen rune of death in a manner that would achieve her specific, paradoxical objective. This was not a simple assassination, it was a ritualistic murder intended to leave a lasting, profound scar on the very fabric of existence. The night of this heinous act became forever known as the Night of Black Knives. Under the cloak of darkness, a shadowy cadre of assassins, all women and of Numan descent, a race closely associated with Marika herself, hinting at deeper, more complex layers of betrayal and manipulation, infiltrated the hallowed grounds of the Erdtree. These assassins, known as the Black Knife Assassins, were equipped with specialized weapons, daggers imbued with the very essence of the stolen rune of death. The power of these blades was not merely to kill, but to sever the soul from the body, a precise and horrifying application of the rune's stolen authority. Godwyn the Golden, unsuspecting in his slumber, became the first demigod to fall. The assassins, guided by Ranni's dark intent, struck him down, not in a manner that would extinguish his life entirely, but in a way that specifically targeted his soul, leaving his physical form intact, albeit devoid of its animating spirit. This unique form of death, a soul death without a corresponding bodily demise, was unprecedented and deeply unsettling. The implications of such a death, a violation of the natural order of life and death as dictated by the Elden Ring, were profound and far-reaching. The soulless husk of Godwyn the Golden, a grotesque monument to Ranni's ambition, was subsequently interred beneath the Erdtree, a place of immense spiritual significance. However, his burial was not one of peace. Instead, his corrupted remains became a vessel for a burgeoning horror, deathblight. This insidious affliction, a manifestation of the rune of death's uncontrolled power, began to spread from his body, corrupting the very roots of the Erdtree itself. The sacred tree, once a symbol of life and grace, began to sicken, its golden glow dimming as the blight seeped into its vital network, a physical representation of the spiritual wound inflicted upon the lands between. This deep-seated corruption would continue to spread, subtly at first, then with increasing virulence, impacting the very ecosystem of the lands between and creating new, horrifying forms of life and undeath. The implications of this pervasive death blight, emanating from the heart of the Golden Order, were truly apocalyptic, threatening to unravel the very fabric of existence. The news of Godwin's grotesque demise, coupled with the blasphemous nature of his soul death, sent shockwaves through the lands between. Marika, the Eternal Queen, revered as a goddess and the vessel of the Elden Ring, was plunged into an abyss of grief and incandescent rage. Her beloved firstborn, the epitome of her golden order, had been defiled in the most unimaginable way. In her anguish, and perhaps in a desperate attempt to rectify the cosmic imbalance caused by the rune of death's theft and misuse, Marika committed an act of unparalleled consequence. She shattered the Elden Ring. This act was not a mere outburst of emotion. It was a deliberate, monumental decision laden with profound implications for the entire lands between. The Elden Ring, the very embodiment of the Golden Order's principles and the source of all grace, was not a physical object in the traditional sense, but a conceptual framework, a collection of fundamental runes that governed the laws of reality. By shattering it, Marika broke these fundamental runes, unleashing their raw power and disrupting the established order. This act of deicide, a rebellion against the very cosmic entity that had granted her power, was a desperate gamble, a defiant gesture against the greater will and its unwavering dogma. It was an act of both profound sorrow and immense power, a queen breaking the very crown that defined her reign, a goddess defying the very god who had elevated her. The motivations behind this drastic action are complex and debated, but it is clear that Marika's grief for Godwin, coupled with a growing disillusionment with the greater will's restrictive influence, fueled her cataclysmic decision. She sought to dismantle the system that had allowed such a tragedy to occur, even if it meant tearing apart the very fabric of her own creation. The immediate consequence of the Elden Ring's shattering was the fragmentation of its power. The fundamental runes, once harmoniously integrated within the ring, now became discrete entities, each imbued with immense, untamed power. These fragments, known as great runes, were scattered across the lands between, drawing the attention of Marika's demigod children and their consorts. Each of these powerful beings, born of Marika and Radagon, who was in fact Marika herself in a different aspect, a profound and complex duality that further complicates the family tree, or through other unions, felt an undeniable pull towards these potent artifacts. The allure of such immense power was irresistible, a siren song that awakened dormant ambitions and ignited long-simmering rivalries. Among those who claimed these great runes were some of the most formidable and tragically flawed figures in the lands between. Malenia, the blade of Miquella, an unalloyed goddess afflicted by the scarlet rot, claimed a great rune, its power amplifying her already devastating martial prowess and perhaps exacerbating the relentless spread of her internal corruption. Her twin brother, Miquella, a powerful Empyrean, a demigod chosen by the greater will to potentially succeed Marika, who tragically remained eternally young, also held a great rune, though its ultimate fate and his own remain shrouded in mystery, his quest for a cure to Malenia's rot driving many of his actions. Radagon, the Star Scourge, a colossal warrior who had single-handedly halted the very movement of the stars, claimed another, its power bolstering his already immense strength and perhaps contributing to the eventual madness that consumed him. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, a former carrion royal who had willingly merged with a colossal serpent, devoured a great rune, its power fueling his insatiable hunger for power and his defiance of the Erdtree. Mog, the Lord of Blood, a perverse demigod who worshipped an outer god of blood and sought to establish a new dynasty, claimed a great rune, using its power to fuel his gruesome rituals and his obsession with Miquella. Morgoth, the Omen King, a tragic figure who secretly guarded the Erdtree despite being reviled as an omen, a race born with horns and deemed cursed by the Golden Order, possessed a great rune, using its power to defend the capital against all challengers. And finally, Godric the Grafted, a pathetic and ambitious descendant of Godfrey, who desperately sought to emulate the strength of his ancestors, also acquired a great rune, using its power to fuel his grotesque practice of grafting the limbs of others onto his own body. Each demigod's acquisition of a great rune was a pivotal moment, shaping their destiny and the fate of the lands between. The inherent power of these fragments amplified their existing traits, both virtues and vices, twisting their ambitions and driving them to increasingly extreme actions. The great runes, rather than unifying the demigods, served to further divide them, fueling their individual desires for dominance and their increasingly warped interpretations of the Golden Order's legacy. The very essence of the Elden Ring, once a symbol of unity and order, had become a catalyst for chaos and division. This act of shattering and the subsequent scramble for power plunged the lands between into an era of unprecedented turmoil and bloodshed, an era now known simply as the Shattering. The demigods, once bound by familial ties and a shared heritage, turned against one another, their armies clashing in epic battles that scarred the very landscape. Each sought to consolidate their power, to claim more great runes, and to ultimately seize control of the fragmented Elden Ring, believing themselves to be the rightful successor to Marika's throne. The entire continent became a vast battlefield, littered with the corpses of soldiers and the ruins of once proud kingdoms. The very concept of peace became a distant memory, replaced by a relentless struggle for survival and dominance. In the wake of this cataclysm, the Greater Will, the enigmatic outer god that had long overseen the lands between, effectively abandoned its charge. Its influence waned, its grace receded, and the once vibrant glow of the Erdtree began to fade, a stark visual representation of the divine withdrawal. The Golden Order, once an unyielding force, fractured and withered, its tenets disregarded, and its authority undermined by the warring demigods. The lands between, once a realm bathed in the golden light of grace, was left adrift, a desolate landscape awaiting a champion, a tarnished, to mend the fractured world and restore its lost glory. The stage was set for a new age, an age of uncertainty, of struggle, and of the potential for a new order to rise from the ashes of the old. Following the cataclysmic events of the Shattering, the lands between descended into an era of unprecedented conflict, now known as the Demigod Wars. This period, occurring in the recent past, saw the scattered shards of the Elden Ring, the great runes, empower the demigods, children of Marika, to unthinkable levels. Each demigod, inheriting a piece of the divine order, believed themselves the rightful successor to the fractured throne, igniting a brutal free-for-all for dominion over the ravaged realm. The very fabric of society unraveled as these godlike beings, fueled by ambition, grief, Madness and duty turned their immense power against one another, carving a path of destruction across the once golden lands. Among these warring factions, Godric the Grafted, a direct descendant of Godfrey and Marika, emerged as a figure defined by his profound insecurity and desperate quest for power. Lacking the inherent strength and charisma of his more formidable siblings and half siblings, Godric sought to compensate through grotesque means. He began a macabre practice of grafting, surgically attaching the limbs of defeated warriors and even his own soldiers onto his body. This process, a twisted mimicry of strength, was not merely for physical augmentation, but a desperate attempt to absorb the power and prestige of those he conquered. Each grafted arm and leg was a testament to his ambition, a horrifying mosaic of stolen might, yet it only served to highlight his intrinsic weakness and the depths of his depravity. His forces, though numerous, were often poorly led, reflecting his own cowardice and lack of strategic prowess. While the lands between erupted in violence, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, remained largely removed from the direct conflict. Her story was one of profound heartbreak and unwavering devotion. Following Radagon's abrupt departure to become Marika's second consort, Rennala, once a revered sorceress and the leader of the Carian royal family, retreated into the hallowed sanctuary of the Grand Library of Raya Lucarian Academy. There, amidst ancient tomes and arcane knowledge, she cradled the amber egg, a gift from Radagon, which contained the great rune of the unborn. This egg, a symbol of their lost love and their children, became her singular focus. She mourned not just the loss of her husband, but the shattering of her family and the world she once knew. Her grief consumed her, rendering her an isolated, almost catatonic figure, incapable of participating in the brutal wars raging outside the Academy's walls, her immense magical power dormant, used only to protect her sanctuary and her precious, fragile egg. In stark contrast to Renala's passive sorrow, General Radon, the Star Scourge Rennala, and Radagon's eldest son, became one of the most formidable warriors of the demigod wars. A colossal figure, both in stature and reputation, Radon was a master of gravity magic, a unique discipline he learned from a master in the distant lands of the Badlands. His control over gravitational forces was so profound that he could ride his beloved yet undersized steed, Leonard, despite his immense weight, a testament to both his skill and his enduring affection for his companion. Radon's motivations were complex, driven not by raw ambition for the Elden Ring, but by a deep-seated love and respect for his half-sister, Ranni. Understanding the dire implications of Ranni's fate, which was intertwined with the movement of the stars, Radon used his immense power to halt the very cosmos. By freezing the celestial bodies in their orbits, he prevented the destiny that Ranni sought to avoid, effectively delaying the inevitable and sacrificing his own freedom for her sake. His army, the Redmane Knights, were fiercely loyal, inspired by his strength, his honor, and his unwavering commitment to his family, even if that commitment led him to defy the natural order of the universe. Meanwhile, in the volcanic depths of Mount Gelmir, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, another child of Marika, chose a path of radical defiance against the established order. Disgusted by the Golden Order, which he perceived as a hypocritical and oppressive regime, Rykard sought to dismantle it through extreme means. He presented himself to a colossal, ancient serpent, the god-devouring serpent residing within the fiery maw of Volcano Manor. In an act of ultimate blasphemy, Rykard willingly allowed himself to be consumed by the serpent, merging his consciousness and his great rune with the beast. This grotesque transformation rendered him a monstrous, immortal demigod, a living embodiment of defiance. As the Lord of Blasphemy, Rykard's new purpose was to devour the gods and all who upheld the Erdtree, believing that only through this ultimate destruction could a new, truly free world emerge. His followers, the abductor virgins and the recusants, were zealous in their devotion, lured by his promise of liberation from the Golden Order's tyranny, participating in macabre hunts and sacrifices within the fiery fortress. Hidden within the heart of Landel, the royal capital, Morgott, the Omen King, played a crucial, yet largely unacknowledged role in the demigod wars. Despite being an omen, born with the accursed horns and tail that marked him as an outcast and subject to persecution by the Golden Order, Morgott harbored an unwavering loyalty to the Erdtree and the Golden lineage. He secretly defended the capital from within, tirelessly repelling the assaults of his ambitious siblings and their armies. His existence was a paradox, a reviled figure, yet the most steadfast defender of the very system that condemned him. He fought not for personal glory or power, but out of a profound sense of duty and a tragic, unrequited love for the Erdtree, which he saw as his birthright and his sacred charge. His identity was a closely guarded secret, known only to a select few, as he believed revealing his omen heritage would undermine the authority he sought to protect. The stage was set for a confrontation of epic proportions when Malenia, Blade of Miquella, arrived in Caelid. Malenia, one of Marika's most powerful children, was tragically afflicted by the scarlet rot, a horrifying, incurable disease that slowly consumed her body. Despite her debilitating condition, she was an unmatched warrior, her skill with a blade legendary. Driven by a desire to aid her beloved twin brother, Miquella, who sought to cure her rot and establish a new order, Malenia journeyed to the blighted lands of Caelid. She was accompanied by her loyal clean-wrought knights, warriors who had sworn to serve her even unto corruption, their armor stained with the telltale crimson of the rot, a testament to their enduring fealty. Her objective was clear: to confront General Radagon, whose immense power and control over the stars directly impeded Miquella's plans for the Erdtree, a sanctuary Miquella was creating to nurture life free from the Golden Order's influence. The ensuing clash between Malenia and Radagon in Caelid was a cataclysmic event, a true battle of titans that shook the very foundations of the lands between. The two demigods, each wielding immense power and driven by unyielding conviction, engaged in a devastating duel that laid waste to the entire landscape. The crimson sands of Caelid, already a desolate region, became a scar, forever marked by their conflict. The sheer force of their blows reshaped the terrain, leaving craters and fissures where once there might have been hills or plains. Their armies, the clean-wrought knights and the red-maned knights, fought with equal ferocity, their loyalties unyielding, their bodies piling up as collateral damage in the wake of their leader's titanic struggle. The air itself crackled with arcane energy and the stench of blood and decaying flesh. As the battle raged, Malenia, pushed to her absolute limits and facing an opponent of unparalleled might, made a desperate and devastating choice. To overcome Radagon, she unleashed the full, unchecked power of the Scarlet Aeonia, the ultimate manifestation of her debilitating disease. This act was a horrifying explosion of rot, a crimson bloom that engulfed a vast swathe of Caelid. The Scarlet Aeonia was not merely an attack, it was a biological weapon of unimaginable potency, infecting Radagon directly with the scarlet rot. The insidious disease, which had slowly consumed Malenia, now began its relentless assault on the Star Scourge, corrupting his body and mind. The very land of Caelid, already barren, was further blighted, transformed into a festering wasteland of scarlet flowers and rotting vegetation, a grim monument to Malenia's desperate act. Despite the unimaginable power of the scarlet rot, Radon's immense constitution and his great rune allowed him to survive the initial onslaught. However, the disease ravaged his mind, stripping him of his intellect and his noble purpose. Driven mad by the incessant agony and corruption, the once proud Star Scourge was reduced to a mindless beast, continuing to wander the blighted plains of Caelid. His power, though, remained immense, a primal force of destruction, now untethered from reason or control. He became a terrifying, unpredictable force, a danger to any who dared to cross his path, his once glorious army now reduced to scattered remnants, guarding their fallen lord out of a tragic, enduring loyalty. His mind was broken, but his body, sustained by his great rune and the sheer force of his will, continued its aimless, destructive existence. Malenia, having unleashed such a devastating power, paid a heavy price. The Scarlet Aeonia, while defeating Radon, also consumed the last vestiges of her strength. Severely weakened and falling into a deep, protective coma, she was rendered utterly incapacitated. It was her most loyal clean-wrought knight, Finlay, who performed an incredible feat of devotion. Finlay, battling through the ravaged lands and evading countless dangers, carried the comatose Malenia all the way back to the sanctuary of the Erdtree, Miquella's nascent haven. This arduous journey, a testament to Finlay's unwavering loyalty, was itself a legendary undertaking, ensuring Malenia's survival and her eventual return to her brother's side, though forever marked by the rot. In the chaotic aftermath of these grand conflicts, Godric, who had previously suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of Malenia in an earlier encounter, further solidified his reputation as a coward. Rather than facing the consequences of his ambition or continuing to fight, he fled back to the perceived safety of Stormvale Castle. This retreat, coupled with his earlier defeat, left him thoroughly discredited in the eyes of the other demigods and the remaining inhabitants of the lands between. His desperate grafting and his grand pronouncements of power were now seen as hollow boasts, further cementing his image as a pathetic and insecure figure, clinging to a false sense of authority within his fortified stronghold. The cumulative effect of these demigod wars was catastrophic. The entire lands between, once a realm of splendor and prosperity under the Golden Order, was utterly devastated. Countless lives were lost, entire cities reduced to rubble, and vast swathes of land rendered uninhabitable or eternally blighted. The once clear lines of authority and governance dissolved into anarchy, with various factions and remnants of armies vying for control over fragmented territories. The wars left an indelible scar on the land and its inhabitants, a legacy of suffering and decay that permeated every corner of the realm. This prolonged and brutal conflict eventually led to a stalemate. No single demigod was strong enough to completely overcome the others, and the constant fighting only served to deplete their resources and further weaken their claims. In response to this unending chaos and the failure of its chosen champions to restore order, the Greater Will, the outer god that had once guided the Erdtree and the Golden Order, gradually withdrew its direct influence. The lands between were left in a state of profound decay, a broken world awaiting a new savior. The path to becoming the Elden Lord, once a clear succession, was now open to anyone strong enough to brave the dangers, gather the great runes, and mend the shattered Elden Ring, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the widespread desolation for a new age to dawn. Following the harrowing demigod wars, a conflict that tore the lands between asunder, the realm entered a new, unsettling phase, one we now refer to as the present era, or the stagnation. This period, marked by a profound sense of decay and arrested development, began immediately after the shattering of the Elden Ring and the subsequent, inconclusive battles among Queen Marika's offspring. With the very symbol of order and divinity fractured into great runes, each claimed by a demigod, the lands between found itself in a precarious stalemate, a protracted cessation of outright war that nonetheless offered no peace, only a slow, agonizing decline. The most visible manifestation of this decline was the Erdtree itself, the colossal golden tree that had once showered the land with its blessings. Now, its magnificent trunk remained, but its radiant grace, once a ubiquitous presence, had dimmed considerably. The Erdtree became largely inaccessible, its golden glow now more a distant, tantalizing memory than a tangible source of sustenance or divine favor. Its blessings, once freely given, were now withheld, leaving the inhabitants of the lands between to contend with a world increasingly bereft of its former vitality. The guidance of grace, that ethereal golden light that once directed the chosen, also faded for most, leaving them adrift in a world without clear purpose or divine instruction. This absence of grace was not merely a spiritual void, but a practical one, as the very fabric of reality seemed to fray at the edges without the unifying power of the whole Elden Ring. The land itself began to wither, crops failed in some regions, and the once vibrant ecosystems became more hostile, reflecting the internal turmoil of its rulers. At the heart of this cosmic catastrophe, within the very roots of the Erdtree, lay Queen Marika, the Eternal. Imprisoned perhaps by the Greater Will itself for her role in the shattering, or perhaps by some other unseen force, she remained a silent, suffering monarch. Her divine power, once capable of shaping reality, was now constrained, rendering her utterly unable to mend the Elden Ring herself. This inability was a cruel irony, for she was its vessel, its very embodiment, and yet she could not restore what she had, in some way, broken. Her confinement symbolized the paralysis of the entire realm, a queen bound, a world stagnating, waiting for an external force to intervene. The very air around the Erdtree, once vibrant with golden motes of grace, now carried a faint, melancholic hum, a testament to the suffering of its divine prisoner. The Golden Order, the prevailing religious and political doctrine established by Marika and Godfrey, once the supreme authority in the lands between, also fractured under the immense pressure of the shattered ring. Without a unified divine will or a clear, uncontested leader, its tenets began to be interpreted in myriad ways. What was once a singular, unwavering truth devolved into a cacophony of competing philosophies and cults. Its authority, once absolute, eroded significantly, giving rise to regional powers and independent factions that no longer felt bound by its increasingly ambiguous decrees. This fragmentation led to widespread theological disputes, with scholars and priests arguing over the true meaning of grace, the nature of the greater will, and the path to salvation. Some clung to the old ways, desperately trying to uphold the crumbling edifice of the Golden Order, while others, disillusioned, sought new spiritual paths. It was into this desolate, fractured world that the tarnished were called back. These were individuals once exiled from the lands between, stripped of their grace, and cast out for reasons now largely forgotten or deliberately obscured. They were the ungraced, the ones who had lost the golden light in their eyes, and yet, in this time of profound spiritual darkness, it was to them that the fading guidance of grace returned. This return was not a grand, brilliant beacon, but often a subtle, almost imperceptible whisper, a faint golden glow in the periphery of their vision, urging them back to the forsaken lands. They were the last hope, the unlikely saviors, chosen not for their inherent divinity, but perhaps for their very lack of it, their outsider status making them immune to the corruptions that plagued the demigods. Many tarnished, driven by a complex mix of ambition, a sense of destiny, or simply the inexplicable pull of this renewed grace, began their perilous journeys from the stranded graveyard. This desolate, forgotten place served as a symbolic starting point, a liminal space between exile and potential glory. Here they would awaken, often with fragmented memories and a profound sense of disorientation, to find themselves at the very bottom of a hierarchical society, yet imbued with the singular purpose of seeking the Elden Ring. Their initial steps were tentative, their path fraught with danger, but the faint glimmer of grace, however sporadic, spurred them onward through the ravaged landscape. They were a diverse group, hailing from various walks of life and different regions beyond the lands between, each carrying their own history and their own burdens. Some were warriors, others scholars, still others, those who had simply survived long enough to hear the call. As these tarnished ventured deeper into the lands between, many would eventually find their way to the Round Table Hold. This ethereal, non-physical sanctuary existed outside the conventional geography of the world, accessible only through a mysterious form of teleportation. It served as a crucial hub, a haven where tarnished could gather, share information, and prepare for the dawning task ahead. Within its hallowed halls, they could rest, hone their skills, and consult with various figures who offered guidance and aid. It was a place of temporary respite from the dangers of the outside world, a neutral ground where even rival tarnished might coexist, bound by the shared ultimate goal of becoming Elden Lord. The very existence of the Round Table Hold underscored the desperate need for a unifying force in the lands between, a place where the scattered hopes of humanity could coalesce. Among the most important figures within the Round Table Hold was Enya, the finger reader. These ancient, wizened women served as conduits for the two fingers, enigmatic entities believed to be emissaries of the greater will. Enya, with her withered hands and cryptic pronouncements, interpreted the two fingers' prophecies, offering guidance and direction to the tarnished. Her words, often shrouded in metaphor and ancient lore, were crucial for understanding the larger cosmic drama unfolding. She would explain the significance of the great runes, the nature of the demigods, and the ultimate purpose of the Tarnished's quest. Her role was to provide the spiritual and strategic framework for the Tarnished's journey, translating the divine will into actionable steps, however obscure they might seem. Beyond the lingering influence of the fractured Golden Order, the stagnation also saw the emergence of numerous factions and cults, each vying for power or seeking alternative paths to salvation. With the greater will's influence seemingly diminished, other cosmic entities, known as outer gods, began to exert their insidious influence over the lands between. These cults, dedicated to various outer gods, offered their followers different forms of power, different promises of a new order, or simply different interpretations of the world's suffering. Some worshipped the Formless Mother, seeking power through blood and madness. Others turned to the Fell God, embracing the destructive flames of the giants. Still others, like the Godskin Apostles, served a mysterious, destined death that had been sealed away. These diverse spiritual movements reflected the profound uncertainty and desperation that gripped the land as people sought meaning and hope in a world that seemed to have abandoned them. Amidst this chaos, the nomadic merchants, a distinct group with their own unique culture and traditions, continued their arduous wanderings across the lands between. Ostracized and often persecuted by the settled populations, who viewed them with suspicion and disdain, they nonetheless persevered. Clinging fiercely to their ancient customs and their unique musical instruments, they traversed dangerous territories, trading their wares and offering glimpses into a world beyond the immediate turmoil. Their resilience in the face of widespread prejudice highlighted the deep-seated divisions within the lands between, where even those who offered essential services were subject to scorn and violence. They represented a stubborn refusal to conform to the dominant, often cruel, societal norms. The Omens, a race of cursed beings born with horns and other monstrous features, continued to endure a life of profound suffering and discrimination. Their existence was a direct testament to the Golden Order's cruelty, as they were considered an affront to divinity and often imprisoned within the subterranean shunning grounds beneath the capital or hunted down and executed. Their horns, a mark of their curse, were often surgically removed at birth, a barbaric practice meant to purify them, though it rarely succeeded in altering their fate. Despite their tragic circumstances, some omens, like Morgoth, the Omen King, managed to rise to positions of power, albeit through immense personal struggle and sacrifice, often hiding their true nature. Their plight served as a stark reminder of the Golden Order's hypocrisy and its willingness to inflict immense suffering in the name of purity. Similarly, the Misbegotten, a race of beast-like humanoids, were subjected to widespread enslavement and oppression throughout the lands between. Their grotesque appearances and perceived inferiority made them easy targets for exploitation. They were forced into servitude, often laboring in mines or serving as cannon fodder in battles, their lives considered cheap and expendable. Their suffering, like that of the Omens, was a dark stain on the history of the Golden Order, revealing the depths of its intolerance and its capacity for systematic cruelty. These oppressed groups, the Omens and the Misbegotten, represented the forgotten and discarded elements of society, their very existence a challenge to the idealized image of a benevolent Golden Order. Throughout this period of stagnation, the greater will, the enigmatic outer god, believed to be the source of the Elden Ring's power, remained conspicuously silent. Seemingly abandoning the lands between to its fate, it offered no direct intervention, no clear guidance beyond the fading grace that called the tarnished. Its silence was deafening, a cosmic shrug that left the inhabitants of the lands between to grapple with their own destiny. It awaited a new Elden Lord, a champion who could mend the ring and restore order, but it offered no direct path, only the challenge. This absence of direct divine intervention forced the tarnished to rely on their own strength, their own cunning, and their own interpretations of the fragmented clues left behind. Meanwhile, the various demigods, each holding a great rune, continued their individual struggles for power and dominance. Malenia, the blade of Miquella, remained in a state of suspended animation in her Erdtree, her battle with Radagon having left her in a deep slumber. Radagon, consumed by the scarlet rot, wandered the wastes of Caelid, a shadow of his former self. Rykard, lord of blasphemy, had sacrificed himself to the god-devouring serpent, becoming a grotesque fusion of man and beast. Mohg, lord of blood, pursued his dark ambition to elevate his half-brother Miquella to godhood. Godric the Grafted, a pathetic figure clinging to power through grotesque grafting, held court in Stormvale Castle. Rennala, queen of the full moon, remained in her academy, lost in grief and scholarly pursuits. Each demigod, with their own motivations and their own corrupted power, represented a potential path to restoring order or plunging the lands between into further chaos. Their continued existence, each a fragment of the shattered whole, ensured that the stalemate would persist until a new Elden Lord emerged to challenge their claims and ultimately to mend the Elden Ring. The stage was set for the tarnished, the ungraced, to step into this epic drama and forge a new future for the lands between. And so, after countless ages of stasis, of the lands between languishing without a true Elden Lord, we arrive at the present day, the era of the Tarnished's quest. This is where you, the player, step into the shattered reality of Elden Ring. Your journey begins not as a celebrated hero, but as one of the many tarnished, those exiled from the grace of the Erdtree, and then, mysteriously, called back. This return, a whisper of guidance from the greater will itself, manifests as a golden light, visible only to you and your fellow tarnished, pointing towards the path you must walk. You awaken in the chapel of anticipation, a place shrouded in mystery and foreboding. Your first encounter is with the grafted scion, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and steel, a minor shard-bearer whose power, though significant to a newly awakened tarnished, is ultimately a mere shadow of the demigods you will eventually face. This initial confrontation is designed to be a crucible, a harsh introduction to the brutal realities of the lands between. Most tarnished at this stage are summarily defeated, their journey seemingly ending before it truly begins. However, this defeat is not the end. It is, in fact, a crucial part of your initiation. Upon your inevitable demise, you are transported not to a spirit world, but to the stranded graveyard in Limgrave, the starting zone of your epic quest. This mechanic, the ability to respawn at sites of grace or stakes of Marika, is fundamental to the very concept of the Tarnished's resilience, their inability to truly die, a consequence of the shattering of the Elden Ring and the subsequent breakdown of the natural order of life and death. Here, At the precipice of your true adventure, you are greeted by Vare, a cloaked figure with a distinctive pointed mask. Vare, with his unsettlingly polite demeanor, quickly establishes himself as a pivotal early character, though his true allegiances remain veiled for a time. He greets you with a mocking observation, highlighting your maidenless status. In the lands between, a maiden is a companion, a guide, and crucially, the one who can channel the power of runes to strengthen a tarnished. Without a maiden, a tarnished cannot level up, cannot grow stronger, and thus cannot hope to challenge the demigods. Vare's taunt is not merely derision, but a direct challenge, a prompt for you to seek out the Two Fingers, the direct emissaries of the Greater Will, who reside within the Round Table hold. He suggests that perhaps they, the ancient withered digits of a cosmic entity, might bestow upon you a maiden, or at least guide you to one. This interaction immediately sets the stakes and outlines your immediate goal. Find a way to gain power. As you venture further into Limgrave, navigating its crumbling ruins and hostile wildlife, you inevitably discover your first sight of grace. These ethereal bonfires, scattered throughout the lands between, serve as checkpoints, places of rest, and crucially points of communication with the Greater Will. It is at one of these sites of grace that Malenia, a mysterious young woman with one eye closed and a spectral, almost otherworldly presence, appears before you. Malenia, unlike other maidens, is not bound by traditional service. She offers an accord, a pact born of mutual necessity. She will serve as your maiden, allowing you to channel the power of runes and grow stronger. But in exchange, you must promise to take her to the foot of the Erdtree. Her ultimate goal, shrouded in enigma at this early stage, is to find the purpose for which she was born, a purpose seemingly tied to the very fate of the Erdtree itself. This pact is the true beginning of your journey to become the Elden Lord. With Malenia as your maiden, the path forward becomes clear, though daunting. Your primary objective is to defeat the demigods, the progeny of Queen Marika and Radagon, who have each claimed a great rune, a shard of the shattered Elden Ring. These great runes are not merely powerful artifacts, they are fragments of the very concept of order and divinity, and by collecting them, you aim to reassemble the Elden Ring and mend the broken world. The demigods, each a twisted reflection of their divine lineage, rule over vast territories, their power and madness intertwined. This task is monumental, requiring not just strength, but cunning, perseverance,